So I want you to imagine something for a second. Like, really put yourself right in the middle of this scenario.
Okay. Setting the scene.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a Tuesday morning. You're just, doing your normal routine. Maybe you are pouring that very first cup of coffee.
The essential first cup.
Right. And the dog is whining to go out. You're scrolling through your phone, just kind of half awake. And you walk out to the mailbox barefoot on the driveway, and you flip through the usual stack of mail.
Mostly junk, probably.
Blue junk. You've got the grocery circulars, maybe a credit card pre-approval. You're definitely going to shred a local magazine. And then you see it.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. An official envelope from the Department of the Treasury, specifically from the Internal Revenue Service.
Which, I mean, let's be honest, that triggers a biological response in almost every American taxpayer.
Oh, absolutely it does.
Your heart rate just spikes before you even open the flap.
The adrenaline hits your bloodstream instantly.
Mm-hmm.
But, you tell yourself it's fine. It's probably fine. You open it up, unfolding the thick paper, expecting maybe a routine update.
Like a minor adjustment or something?
Right. Maybe they even owe you $50.
Well, it'd be nice.
But no. Instead, you are staring at a bolded demand for over $80,000.
Wow. I mean, that is a staggering number to try and process over morning coffee.
It really is. It's the kind of number that literally makes the room spin.
Yeah, I bet.
The room spins, the coffee spills, you completely ignore the dog. You just look closer, trying to make the math make any sense at all.
Right, because how does that even happen?
Well, the letter claims you owe $40,000 in unpaid taxes from several years ago. But that is only half the story.
Let me guess. The penalties.
Exactly. The other $40,000, the second half of this massive bill, is purely accumulated penalties and interest. And this piece of paper, it doesn't just ask nicely for a check.
No, they never do.
Right. The notice explicitly warns of property seizure. It threatens to freeze your bank accounts. It even mentions wage garnishments.
So they are coming after everything.
Everything. Your entire life, the equity in your home, your child's college fund, your basic financial security, it all suddenly feels like it is on the chopping block.
That is terrifying.
But here is the absolute kicker in all of this, down in your bones, that you did absolutely nothing wrong.
You followed the rules.
You filed everything correctly.
Right.
You paid exactly what you owed.
And that is exactly where the psychological nightmare really begins. Because in our legal system, particularly when you are dealing with the IRS, the burden of proof in these administrative scenarios suddenly and overwhelmingly falls entirely on you.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. You essentially have to prove a negative to a massive federal agency that has virtually unlimited resources.
Right. And you have to do all of that while this ticking clock of financial ruin is just hanging right over your head. So, why are we starting with this terrifying hypothetical? Because this exact scenario, this idea of an innocent taxpayer getting crushed by the machinery of a government error, it forces us to confront a really massive foundational question about how our society operates.
Right. It really exposes the wiring of the whole system.
It does. Today in this deep dive, we are exploring the architecture of accountability. We're asking, should the government be held to standards similar to those it imposes on the citizens it governs?
And that is a question that cuts to the very core of what equality before the law actually means in practice.
Yes, exactly.
Because if a citizen makes a mistake, the consequences are incredibly severe and they are financial. But if the government makes a mistake that causes serious life-altering harm, well, what happens? Is just correcting the error enough? Or should compensation actually be required?
And before we get too far into this, I really want to set the ground rules for how we are going to look at this today. Because, this topic can easily derail into a partisan shouting match in about 5 seconds.
Oh, easily. It happens all the time.
But we are not doing that. This is an impartial investigative exploration. We are not here to launch some crusade against the IRS, and we are certainly not here to act as their defense attorneys either.
Right, keeping it objective.
Exactly. We are absolutely not taking any political sides today. Our goal is strictly to examine the mechanics of power, to understand the current legal reality of taxpayer rights, and to weigh the different policy proposals that come up when citizens demand fair treatment.
And I think the central theme that will really anchor our entire discussion today boils down to one word: reciprocity.
Reciprocity, yes.
Yeah.
Keep that exact word in the front of your mind as we go through this. Today, we are examining whether accountability should work in one direction, just from you to the government, or if it should work in both directions.
And to really understand the stakes of that question, we kind of have to look closely at the anatomy of these bureaucratic mistakes.
I do.
Because, as you know, an $80,000 bill does not just appear overnight. It is the result of a very specific compounding chain of events.
So let's actually break down the timeline of this nightmare. We are looking at a representative scenario here, one that is based on real arguments being debated right now by taxpayer advocates and government officials.
Right.
The whole ordeal usually starts innocently enough. Let's say you filed a tax return back in 2022. It was a totally normal year, a routine filing. You hit submit, you paid your taxes, and you just moved on with your life.
As most people do. But the machinery of the state doesn't always move at the speed of real life.
No, it definitely doesn't.
The problem doesn't surface immediately. Years actually pass. The algorithms are running in the background, cross-referencing data, matching up millions of W-2s and 1099s.
Just churning through the data.
Exactly. And let's say around 2025, so 3 years later, an IRS system flags some sort of discrepancy.
Okay, what kind of discrepancy?
Maybe a third party erroneously reported income under your Social Security number. Or maybe a clerk just made a simple keystroke error. Whatever the catalyst is, the agency amends your tax account to reflect what it genuinely believes is a massive underpayment.
And, I mean, you would think, in the era of instant communication that we live in, you'd get an email or a text or a phone call. Something that just says, hey, we noticed an issue, let's clear this up right now.
That would make sense, wouldn't it?
It would. But that is not how this works at all. Instead, the communication breaks down completely. Notice letters are automatically generated and mailed. But let's say you moved, or maybe the zip code was entered wrong in their system.
Which happens constantly.
Right, so the letters just go to an old address.
And that introduces the compounding nature of the error. In the tax code, time is quite literally money.
Oh, man.
While those letters are bouncing around the postal system or maybe sitting unopened in some stranger's mailbox, the interest clock is ticking.
Just ticking away in the background.
Yep. And it is not just interest. It is the failure to pay penalty, which can accumulate to 25% of the unpaid tax.
Yeah.
Plus, it is statutory interest that compounds daily.
I mean, it is mathematical quicksand. And you don't even know you're standing in it.
You have no idea.
The penalties are just stacking up month after month after month. The initial incorrect assessment was bad enough, but the administrative friction makes it exponentially worse.
Much worse.
By the time the postal error is caught, or maybe a certified letter finally tracks you down, the balance has completely ballooned. That original $40,000 error is now an $80,000 crisis. And the first communication you actually open isn't a polite inquiry.
No, absolutely not. By that stage in the collection cycle, the notices are just automated final warnings.
Right.
They are incredibly aggressive. They are legally required to inform you of the government's intent to levy. And for those who don't know, levy means seizing assets.
Which I just want to pause on the psychology of that moment for a second.
Yeah.
Think about trying to cancel a gym membership.
Oh, the worst.
We all know how infuriating that is. They make you jump through hoops, wait on hold for an hour, send certified letters, all just to stop a $50 monthly charge.
Right, it feels impossible.
It does feel impossible. Now scale that feeling of helplessness up to the level of the federal government and replace the $50 with your entire life saving.
The panic is absolute.
Completely. And that panic drives behavior, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. When we talk about how these situations escalate, we really have to look at institutional trust. Because as Americans, we generally operate under the implicit assumption that the government's math is correct. Or, at the very least, we are deeply intimidated by the authority behind that math.
Sure. I mean, if my neighbor walks over and says, hey, you owe me 10 grand, I am going to laugh right in his face and demand proof. I'm going to argue with him.
Of course.
But if the Treasury Department says it, my very first instinct is, oh my God, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
Did I miss a form? Am I going to jail over this?
Exactly. The power dynamic there is entirely asymmetrical.
Yeah.
And because of that intimidation, when citizens receive these notices, their first reaction often isn't to fight back at all.
They just freeze.
Right. They might not know that administrative appeals even exist. They might not understand the Byzantine legal language on the notice.
It's essentially a foreign language.
It really is. And they look at the cost of hiring a tax attorney, which, could be tens of thousands of dollars, and they realize they simply can't afford to defend themselves.
So they just capitulate?
They capitulate out of sheer terror People will literally empty their 401ks, taking a massive penalty just to get the cash.
Wow.
They will take out second mortgages on their homes. They will put themselves in deep, high-interest debt just to get the IRS off their back, even if they are entirely innocent.
That is just so wrong.
Yeah, so the initial mistake was made by the state, but the tangible, devastating financial burden is carried entirely by the ordinary citizen.
But, let's look at the citizen in our scenario, the one who actually decides to fight this thing.
Okay, the fighter.
They enter this completely Kafkaesque maze.
Right.
They spend months and eventually years making hundreds of phone calls. They sit on hold for hours listening to elevator music while their heart is just pounding.
The worst hold music, too.
Yes. And they spend their weekends digging through old bank statements, literally trying to prove a negative, trying to prove they didn't receive money they never received.
Which is incredibly hard to do.
Exactly. And they live under this dark, heavy cloud of government collection for 4 years, and then finally a breakthrough.
The resolution.
Right. After 4 years of relentless grinding, the government finally looks closely at the evidence. An actual human being reviews the file, acknowledges the clerical error or the faulty third-party data, and corrects the account. The $80,000 balance is just reduced to zero.
Which, if you look at it strictly from a bureaucratic standpoint, is a success story.
Wait, a success story?
Well, the system eventually worked, the error was caught, the debt was wiped away, and the taxpayer didn't have to surrender their assets. Case closed.
But hold on. Case closed. This is where I have to throw up a massive red flag.
Go for it.
Because does the concept of no harm, no foul actually apply here? When that account reaches zero, the government just dusts off its hands and says, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
But look at the glaring disparity between the resolution and the reality of what just happened.
Right, the financial debt on the ledger just vanished.
But the 4 years of misery did not.
No, it didn't.
The stress that caused their blood pressure to skyrocket, that did not vanish. The sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if they were going to lose their house, that did not vanish.
The human toll is permanent.
Exactly. The countless hours of lost productivity time they could have spent with their kids or, building their career that is permanently gone. The credit damage if a lien was filed, the lost investment growth from money they had to park in a savings account, just in case none of that is zeroed out.
And you are touching on a really fundamental disconnect here between administrative law and human reality. Correcting a mistake does not automatically compensate someone for the hardship they endured while that mistake was active.
I mean, if I am driving recklessly and I accidentally total your car and then I drag it out in court for 4 years before finally admitting fault, I don't just get to say, my bad, here's a bus pass and walk away.
Right, you'd be laughed out of court.
I have to pay for the car. I have to pay for the rental you needed. I have to make you whole. So I have to ask what level of compensation, if any, is appropriate when a citizen's life is completely derailed by an administrative error.
And that is the exact pivot point in the debate between taxpayer advocates and government officials.
How so?
Well, the citizen is essentially standing in the rubble of their financial peace of mind, asking, I lost 4 years of my life. What are you going to do about it?
And what does the official actually say to that?
The official's response is rarely about morality, honestly. It is almost entirely about legality. They have to explain the boundaries of what is actually permitted under current U.S. law.
Okay, well, let's go there. Let's dig into the legal reality. Because when you hear a story like this, I think your first instinct as an American is, I am going to sue them for everything they've got.
That is the immediate reaction, yeah.
So I want to know how the system currently handles this. If I am this taxpayer and my balance is finally at zero, what can I legally demand from the IRS for putting me through hell?
To understand the official's position here, we really have to look at the existing statutory framework, because the official will point out that the system is not just a complete black hole of recourse. There are defined remedies in place.
Okay, such as? What are my options?
First, you have administrative appeals. Taxpayers have the right to challenge an assessment within the agency through an independent appeals office before it even goes to court.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, if you actually paid the erroneous tax out of fear, there are refund procedures.
Yeah.
And if the government holds your money for too long, they are required by statute to pay you interest on that overpayment.
Okay, so they pay interest on the money they took. I mean, that seems like bare minimum table stakes.
True. There is also the Taxpayer Advocate Service, or TAS. This is an independent organization within the IRS that is specifically designed to help taxpayers resolve systemic problems or situations where the normal channels have just completely broken down and are causing significant hardship.
Which is great. I mean, I'm genuinely glad the TAS exists. But notice what is conspicuously missing from that list of remedies.
The damages.
Right. None of those things address the damage caused by the process itself. If the IRS falsely claims I owe them $40,000, they slap another $40,000 in penalties on me to punish me for being wrong.
Yep.
But if they are wrong and they completely ruin 4 years of my life, they just zero the balance.
Yeah.
Why don't they have to pay me the same $40,000 penalty for their error? What is the legal shield they are hiding behind here?
That shield is actually one of the most powerful and ancient concepts in all of jurisprudence. It is a legal doctrine called sovereign immunity.
Sovereign immunity. Okay, break that down for us, because that sounds like something involving a king and a moat.
You aren't far off, actually. The concept literally stems from English common law, predicated on the idea that, quote, the king can do no wrong.
Oh, wow.
Therefore, the king cannot be sued in his own courts. When the United States was formed, despite totally rejecting the monarchy, American jurisprudence kind of quietly adopted a version of this doctrine.
Wait. We fought a whole revolution to get away from kings, and then we just copied and pasted the king can do no wrong right into our laws.
Essentially, yes, but it was adapted for a republic.
Unbelievable.
In the American context, sovereign immunity dictates that the federal government cannot be sued unless Congress has explicitly passed a law waiving that immunity and authorizing the lawsuit. The sovereign, meaning the state, must literally give you permission to sue it.
I really need to make sure I'm understanding the sheer asymmetry of this. The government can sue me, audit me, levy my bank account, and drag me into court anytime it believes I violated a rule.
Correct.
But I can only take the government to court to demand damages if the government previously wrote a rule saying I'm allowed to do so.
That is exactly right. The playing field is fundamentally intentionally uneven.
That is wild.
Now, Congress has created some exceptions over the years, like the Federal Tort Claims Act, for instance, allows citizens to sue the government for certain negligent acts by federal employees.
Okay, give me an example.
Like if a postal worker accidentally crashes a mail truck into your living room.
Okay, so if they hit my house with a truck, I can sue. But what about the IRS?
The exceptions for tax collection are incredibly narrow. The IRS has very broad statutory authority to assess taxes, issue penalties, and collect revenue. Unless you can prove extreme intentional misconduct or violations of very specific Taxpayer Bill of Rights statutes, which, by the way, is notoriously difficult, you cannot simply sue the IRS for the negligent infliction of emotional or financial distress caused by a prolonged audit or an erroneous $80,000 bill.
I am really struggling to see how this is justifiable in a modern democracy. I want to push back on the rationale here. Why did lawmakers intentionally design a system where the state is shielded in a way that would literally put a private citizen in prison?
If you ask a government official, they will rely heavily on the unique public function argument.
The unique public function, okay.
Right. The rationale is that governments exist to perform massive society-wide tasks that private individuals and corporations simply do not do.
Like what kind of tasks?
Well, only the government regulates immigration and borders. Only the government issues passports. Only the government maintains a standing national military. And crucially, only the government levies taxes to fund all of those operations.
Okay, true.
Because the state is tasked with these existential functions, lawmakers argue that the state must be protected. If the government could be sued for damages every single time a bureaucrat made a typo or a process was delayed, the government would be completely paralyzed by constant litigation.
So is the "we're too important to be sued" defense?
The official argument is that differing legal rules are actually required for the state to function efficiently for the benefit of everyone. Sovereign immunity is viewed as a necessary shield to protect the public purse and ensure the gears of government don't just grind to a halt under the sheer weight of lawsuits.
Okay, I hear the argument, but frankly, I think it's a dodge.
You think so?
I do. And this is exactly where the citizen in our scenario pushes back. Because this feels like incredibly circular logic to justify a monopoly on power. Let's play with an analogy for a second.
Sure.
Let's imagine that tomorrow, Congress decides to fully privatize tax collection. They pass a law, and they hire a massive private corporation to handle all the audits and collections.
A terrifying thought for many, I'm sure, but go on.
Right. But if that private corporation made a massive administrative error, ignored all the evidence for 4 years, falsely threatened to seize a family's home, and drove that family into clinical depression and financial ruin, you better believe they could be sued into oblivion for damages.
Oh, absolutely. The class action lawsuits would be immediate.
So my question is, does the mere fact that the government has unique powers automatically mean it should be exempt from equal accountability? It seems like saying, I have a very special, important job, therefore I don't have to follow the basic rules of fairness.
Which is a very compelling philosophical counter-argument, honestly.
It just makes sense.
The citizen is pointing out that the government does not exist in a vacuum, completely detached from the moral obligations of society. The government was created by the people to serve the people.
Exactly. The official pointing to unique functions explains how the legal system currently justifies the double standard. But it absolutely does not answer the moral question of why it should remain that way. It doesn't prove that sovereign immunity is morally superior or fundamentally fair at all.
And that transition from the legal reality to the moral reality is where this debate gets truly fascinating. Because once we understand the mechanisms of how the law shields the government, we are forced to step back and ask a bigger question.
Which is?
What is fairness? What does equality actually mean in a republic?
Let's dig into that moral philosophy. Because I think we throw the word equality around a lot without defining what it looks like when the rubber actually meets the road.
In the arguments put forward by taxpayer advocates, they often offer a very grounded, practical definition of equality. They strip away all the Latin legal phrases and the complex statutory codes.
Keeping it simple.
Right. The citizen's argument essentially boils down to this: you live, I live, you eat, I eat, you don't harm me, I don't harm you.
The golden rule.
Precisely. It is the principle of reciprocity in its purest, most ancient form. The argument is that if either party causes harm to the other, there should be accountability, and the rules of that accountability should operate identically in both directions.
You don't harm me, I don't harm you. I mean, it sounds so simple and undeniable. This citizen is basically arguing that the government is not some elevated, untouchable deity just floating above the populace. It is an institution manned by citizens, working for citizens. So, if the government has the authority to completely ruin you financially when you make a mistake on your taxes through massive penalties and interest, why is it considered radical to suggest the government should face comparable financial responsibility when it ruins you through its own incompetence?
And to really drive this point home, advocates use a really powerful analogy about destroying a business.
Ooh, I like this one.
Imagine you own a small bakery. It's your livelihood. If a private citizen acts negligently, say they are texting and driving, and they crash their truck right through the front window of your bakery, destroying your ovens and shutting you down for months.
Right, total disaster.
If that driver gets out of the truck and says, "Wow, I'm so sorry, that was a total mistake, my bad," is that apology sufficient under the law?
Of course not. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
It doesn't buy new commercial ovens. I'm sorry, it doesn't pay my employees while the shop is closed.
Exactly. The law steps in and recognizes that an apology is entirely inadequate in that situation. The law requires compensation. It requires the negligent party to financially rebuild what was lost, to literally make the victim whole again.
Yes.
So the citizen is asking a very pointed moral question here. Why should a government apology, which, by the way, often just takes the form of a zeroed-out balance sheet, be treated as sufficient when a private apology is legally recognized as worthless?
That is the crux of it right there. If an IRS error shuts down my life for 4 years, a zero balance doesn't buy my time back. But, this is where the government official will draw a hard line in the sand, and I really want to explore this defense. It's the distinction between intent and impact.
Yes. The official will argue that the law generally and rightfully distinguishes between an honest mistake, ordinary negligence, and intentional misconduct or malice.
So just breaking that down, the official is saying that an overwhelmed IRS agent accidentally typing an extra zero on a spreadsheet is not the same thing as an agent maliciously deciding to destroy a taxpayer's life.
Right. The government is looking at the situation strictly from the perspective of moral blameworthiness. A typo is just a byproduct of human fallibility in a massive, massive system. It is not malice.
Sure.
Therefore, the legal system shouldn't punish the government with massive financial damages as if it acted with malice. The intent really matters to them.
But the citizen contrasts this sharply by looking exclusively from the victim's perspective. And from the victim's perspective, intent does not matter one single bit.
Oh, so?
Because the damage is completely identical. If a family loses their home to a wrongful foreclosure or if, say, an elderly couple has to empty their retirement account to pay a bogus tax bill just to avoid asset seizure, their suffering's exactly the same either way.
It doesn't change the reality on the ground.
Right. The victim doesn't become less homeless just because the bureaucrat made a simple typo instead of acting out of spite. The financial ruin, the immense stress, the health impacts, they're all identical regardless of the government's intent.
This is a classic philosophical clash that echoes throughout the entire justice system. Do we weight the actor's intent, or do we weight the outcome for the victim?
It's a tough balance.
It is. Current U.S. law heavily weights the actor's intent when determining liability, particularly to protect government actors from being paralyzed by the fear of making honest mistakes. The citizen, however, is arguing that true justice requires us to look at the victim's impact and demand restitution.
I want to play devil's advocate here and actively challenge both sides of this moral framework, because this is where it gets really sticky. Let's push back on the citizen side first. We ask, is equality identical treatment, or is it equal justice?
Meaning what, in practice?
Meaning, if we force the government to operate under the exact same risk parameters and financial liabilities as a private individual, do we just cripple its ability to function?
Ah, I see.
If the government is terrified of being sued for massive damages over every administrative typo or delayed notice, does the IRS just stop auditing altogether? Does the government stop issuing passports because they're afraid of liability if a trip gets ruined? Do they stop regulating borders?
And that is the exact fear that keeps lawmakers up at night. If identical treatment means paralyzing the state's ability to act, then society as a whole suffers. The state, just because of the sheer volume of its interactions with 330 million people, needs some breathing room to operate. Mistakes are statistically inevitable.
But then I have to turn around and challenge the official side just as aggressively, because this concept of breathing room sounds great in a police seminar. But does distinguishing between a typo and intentional malice matter at all to the family who just lost everything?
To them, no, it doesn't.
If the government's required breathing room crushes an innocent family, how can a democratic society just shrug its shoulders and say, well, it wasn't on purpose, so good luck rebuilding your life? Is that equal justice?
It is a profound, almost tragic tension. And what makes this debate so intractable is that this deep moral question about justice and making victims whole runs headfirst into a massive, unavoidable mathematical wall.
The math. Right.
Because if we decide the citizen is morally correct, if we decide that the government must compensate taxpayers for the damage caused by its errors, we have to figure out how to pay for it.
Which brings us right out of the realm of philosophy and right into the harsh reality of public policy, the actual cost of reciprocity. If we implement a system where accountability works in both directions, what happens to the country when the government has to start paying out these financial penalties?
The official will outline this concern very clearly. It is the classic problem of unintended consequences.
Okay, lay it out.
Let's say we pass a law that mandates reciprocal financial penalties. If the IRS erroneously threatened you with $40,000 in interest and penalties and you prove them wrong, they now owe you $40,000 in damages.
This isn't fair to the taxpayer.
It does. But multiply that by the millions of interactions the IRS has every single year. Mistakes, as we said, are completely guaranteed in a system that massive.
Right.
The cumulative liability across the entire federal government could be astronomically expensive. We could be talking about billions of dollars in damage payouts every year.
Because they make a lot of mistakes.
Precisely. And we have to remember where those damages are paid from. The government does not have its own money. It only has taxpayer money. These penalties would be paid from public funds.
So we run into the paradox of taxpayers basically paying taxpayers.
Exactly. If the IRS is writing massive penalty checks to citizens who were wronged, that money is draining resources from the Treasury. That means you might be taking money away from infrastructure projects or national defense or social safety nets like Medicare just to pay for administrative errors.
That's a huge trade-off.
Or, alternatively, Congress just raises everyone's taxes the next year to cover the cost of the government's apologies.
Okay, I hear that argument, the we can't afford justice argument, but I have to stop you because the taxpayer advocates have a blistering rebuttal to this that I find incredibly compelling. They challenge the government's fear of these undefined large financial obligations.
How do they reframe it?
They point out the hypocrisy of the scale. Lawmakers and officials are wringing their hands over these theoretical cumulative costs to the public purse. They worry about the government's budget. But the citizen points out that taxpayers face actual concrete bankruptcy right now under the current system.
It's the contrast between a systemic, abstract worry for the state and an individual acute crisis for the citizen.
Yes, the citizen is basically saying, you officials can't give me an exact dollar amount of what these penalties would cost the government, but I can show you the exact dollar amount that drove my neighbor into foreclosure.
It's very real for them.
Exactly. Why is it that only the government's financial burden is considered important in these policy debates?
It really is a question of whose stability we value more as a society.
When a citizen is wiped out by a government error, the system says, tough break, you should have navigated the bureaucracy better. But the moment we suggest the government might lose some money to make it right, suddenly the system gasps and says, oh no, we can't afford that, it would ruin the budget, it's bad public policy.
That reframing really highlights how the status quo implicitly prioritizes the state's financial stability over the individual citizen's financial survival. However, the official will raise another very valid logistical point about the mechanics of this liability. Who specifically is paying?
Right, because the government is made of people. It's not just a faceless building.
Exactly. The official will give the example of, say, a GS7 IRS clerk who is processing thousands of files a week. If they accidentally type 390,000 instead of 39,000 and it ruins a taxpayer's credit, should that individual clerk face personal financial ruin?
I mean, they couldn't afford it anyway.
Should they be sued for $100,000 over a typo?
And this is where the taxpayer advocate makes a crucial clarification. We really need to distinguish between institutional responsibility and individual responsibility. The advocates are very clear here. They do not want to financially ruin individual government employees for honest typos.
Because if you do that, you terrify public servants. Nobody would take the job.
Exactly.
Or if they do, decision-making is completely paralyzed because everyone is terrified of personal liability.
Nobody wants that. The citizen wants the agency to pay the penalty.
Yeah.
Just like it works in the private sector. Think about the bakery analogy again. If a delivery driver for a massive logistics corporation accidentally crashes a truck into your living room, you don't sue the driver personally for $10 million.
Right. The driver doesn't have $10 million.
You sue the corporation.
Yeah.
The corporation's insurance pays to rebuild your house, and then the corporation handles the internal discipline of the driver. They might retrain him, they might suspend him, they might fire him. The citizen is arguing that the government should operate exactly the same way. The agency, the IRS, bears the financial penalty from its budget to make the citizen whole. And then the agency figures out how to fix its internal processes.
But this brings us back to the practical reality of government. If we implement reciprocal penalties at the agency level, how do institutions actually learn?
What do you mean by that?
Well, in the private sector, the threat of massive financial liability forces companies to invest heavily in safety, quality control, and double-checking their work. If an airline has a safety issue, the financial liability is so massive they will spend billions to fix it.
Because shareholders demand it.
Exactly. But the government doesn't have shareholders in the same way. If the IRS pays out $1 billion in penalties, they might just ask Congress for $1 billion more next year to cover it.
Which raises the question, if they don't feel a true financial sting that threatens their existence, where is the structural incentive to prevent these life-altering mistakes? Does forcing them to pay penalties actually improve government efficiency? Or does it just increase administrative costs that get passed back to us?
It is the ultimate puzzle of public administration. How do you motivate a monopoly?
So what does this all mean? We're talking about creating a system where the government fears making mistakes as much as citizens fear making mistakes.
Oh.
And that idea brings us to one of the most fascinating analogies in this entire debate. We are moving into the raw power dynamics of the citizen-state relationship, and I want to introduce what I call the nuclear analogy.
This is perhaps the most provocative argument in the entire discourse regarding sovereign immunity and reciprocity. The analogy compares the concept of citizen government accountability to countries possessing nuclear weapons.
Now, obviously, we are speaking metaphorically here. Taxpayers do not have nukes, nor should they.
Let's hope not.
But let's unpack the psychology of restraint here. The concept is mutually assured destruction, or MAD, applied to civil bureaucracy.
Right. The premise is that when two nations both possess nuclear weapons, they generally avoid direct catastrophic conflict.
Why? Because they suddenly like each other.
Yeah.
Because mutual severe consequences create mutual respect and incredibly careful behavior.
They both know the stakes.
Both sides know that if they strike, they will be struck back just as hard.
Yeah.
There is no consequence-free action. The cost of a mistake is just too high to act recklessly.
The underlying principle here is about unbalanced power. When one side possesses unlimited power to inflict harm without facing any meaningful consequences itself, abuse, or at the very least, severe structural negligence becomes almost inevitable.
Human nature.
Human beings make mistakes. Bureaucracies multiply those mistakes. Without a structural deterrent, there is no pressure to reform.
Exactly. If the IRS knows they can turn your life upside down, freeze your accounts, and terrorize your family with legal threats. But the absolute worst thing that happens to them if they are proven wrong is they have to hit the delete key and say balance zero. Where's the incentive to be careful?
There isn't one.
The citizen is arguing that balanced accountability creates careful behavior.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of American history, this isn't some radical new idea invented by angry taxpayers on the internet. This is a deeply traditional political philosophy. The framers of the U.S. Constitution completely understood the psychology of deterrence.
Right, they're obsessed with it.
They understood that concentrated, unchecked power is inherently dangerous. That is precisely why the entire American government is built on the concept of separation of powers.
Checks and balances.
Exactly. It is why we have judicial review. It's why we have congressional oversight. The system was designed to check power with power, ambition counteracting ambition.
But here's the core friction in our debate today. The government official will point to those exact things. They will say, look, we have checks and balances. We have the tax courts. We have inspector generals who audit the agencies. We have administrative appeals processes.
And the citizen fiercely pushes back on that.
Because they argue those existing checks are entirely insufficient. Why? Because they lack financial teeth.
Right.
Sure, an inspector general might write a scathing 200-page report about how an IRS processing center is mishandling mail. But does that report pay back the money a citizen lost fighting an erroneous audit? Does it refund the interest they paid on a loan they took out just to survive? No.
It doesn't put money back in their pocket.
The existing internal checks do not provide the reciprocal financial pain that the IRS uses so effectively against citizens.
The citizen is essentially saying that administrative reviews and court appeals are completely asymmetrical. If a citizen fails an audit, the citizen loses their house. If the government fails an audit by the inspector general, the agency gets a sternly worded memo and a mandate to update their training manuals.
It's just not the same.
The consequences are not equal, and therefore the respect is not equal.
So I have to critically examine this balance, and I want to ask you, and everyone listening, is mutually assured destruction really the right model for how a citizen should relate to their government? Should our relationship with the state be based on a mutual fear of financial ruin?
It is a rather dark, cynical way to frame a democracy, certainly. You are essentially asking if fear is the only reliable motivator for good governance.
Right. But flip it around. Let's look at the alternative. Is the taxpayer advocate right that when accountability only exists in one direction, trust completely disappears? Because think about it. If you feel like the government has a boot on your neck and you have absolutely no recourse to push back with equal force, you aren't going to trust that government.
You are going to view it as an adversary.
You're going to resent it. You're going to view the system as rigged. So maybe this nuclear analogy isn't really about mutually assured destruction. Maybe it's about mutually assured carefulness.
Mutually assured carefulness. I like that. That is a brilliant way to reframe it. It shifts the focus from punishment to prevention. And it leads us directly to the final and perhaps most important phase of this exploration.
Where do we go from here?
Well, because if the current balance of power is deemed insufficient by the people, if citizens decide they want this mutually assured carefulness, how can that actually be achieved?
Right. If the system is rigged, who has the power to change the rules of the game?
Which brings us to the ultimate mechanism of accountability in a democracy. We need to talk about the ultimate arbiter, which is Congress.
Because the IRS isn't a rogue state just making things up as they go.
Exactly. The official will be very quick to remind everyone of the role of Congress in this entire dynamic. The IRS does not just invent these rules out of thin air. They don't wake up and decide to invent sovereign immunity. Congress writes the tax laws. Congress determines the exact scope of the IRS's authority.
They write the rule book.
And crucially, circling back to sovereign immunity, Congress is the only entity that determines when, how, and for how much the federal government can be sued. The entire legal relationship between the taxpayer and the IRS is defined by statutes passed by elected lawmakers.
And this is where the debate reaches its democratic crescendo, really. Because when the official says this is just how the law is, the citizen asserts a fundamental democratic truth: Congress doesn't own power.
Stand on that.
Well, the government exists only because citizens consent to it. The members of Congress only temporarily exercise authority that is granted to them by voters. The government is not above the people, it works for the people.
The consent of the governed.
Exactly. So if the people decide that the current law no longer reflects fairness, they decide that sovereign immunity is an outdated shield protecting government from rightful accountability, they have the absolute right to elect representatives who will change that law. The official's argument that this is just the law isn't a permanent roadblock. It is merely a description of the current temporary reality.
Which is why this debate often culminates in a very specific policy proposal. It's elegantly simple, yet if enacted, it would completely revolutionize administrative law in the United States.
Let's hear it.
Advocates propose a single law of reciprocity.
One sentence that would change everything. Let's detail this proposal. The concept is this: if the government wrongly imposes financial consequences on an innocent citizen, the government should bear comparable financial consequences after the error is proven.
Let's apply that to our scenario from the beginning of the show.
Okay, so the IRS wrongly slaps you with a $40,000 penalty, freezes your bank accounts, and drags you through 4 years of hell. You finally prove them wrong. Under the law of reciprocity, the government doesn't just zero your balance.
Right. They don't just walk away.
The government would owe you $40,000 for the hardship, stress, and financial damage they caused, using the exact same metrics they use to calculate penalties against taxpayers.
It is a radical shift from the status quo. It moves the system from "we will fix our mistake eventually" to "we will compensate you for our mistake using the exact same financial metrics we would have used to penalize you." It aligns the government's risk perfectly with the citizen's risk.
But I have to throw some final pushback at this, because it brings up massive philosophical questions about democracy itself.
Sure, lay it on me.
Who ultimately decides what fairness is? The proposal sounds perfectly fair to the individual who is wronged. I think we all agree on that. But is it fair to the other 300 million taxpayers who have to fund that $40,000 compensation through their own taxes?
And this is the eternal grinding struggle of representative democracy. You are constantly balancing the righteous grievances of the individual against the collective resources and stability of the whole.
And it leaves us with a question that I think defines this entire deep dive.
Sure.
Can a representative democracy truly claim equality before the law if accountability only operates in one direction? Or, conversely, is the current balance where the government has unique powers and unique legal shields exactly what a functioning, massive administrative state requires just to operate without tearing itself apart in endless litigation?
What is truly fascinating here is that there is no objective, undeniable truth. Both the taxpayer advocates and the government officials ultimately have to agree that this is a question of public policy. It is a debate about our shared values.
Absolutely.
And in a democracy, that debate is never permanently settled. It is continuous.
So let's synthesize everything we've unpacked today. We started this deep dive with a nightmare scenario, a fictional but entirely realistic citizen who spent 4 years trapped in a maze of compounding government errors, facing an $80,000 demand that turned out to be completely false. We explored the stark contrast between the ultimate resolution, just a zeroed-out balance, and the brutal reality of the lost years and profound stress that the citizen can never get back.
From there, we navigated the complex legal reality of sovereign immunity, tracing it back to its roots and understanding that under current law, the government plays by a different set of rules because it performs unique public functions. We waded deep into the moral philosophy of equality, debating whether correcting an administrative error is the same as compensating for the harm caused by that error.
We looked at the intense public policy clash, the government's fear of bankrupting the public purse with unintended consequences versus the very real, very tangible bankruptcies of individual citizens. We explored the nuclear analogy, asking if mutually assured financial consequences are necessary to create respect and restraint between a state and its people. And finally, we arrived at the bedrock of democracy, the power of voters and Congress to redefine this entire relationship through a proposed law of reciprocity.
It has been an incredible journey through the mechanics of power, the math of bureaucracy, and the philosophy of justice.
It really has. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we've discussed today.
Let's hear it.
Tonight's discussion wasn't about whether taxes should exist or whether the government should enforce the law. We need roads, we need schools, we need a functioning society. It was about a much deeper democratic question. When the government has extraordinary power over the lives of its citizens, what level of accountability should accompany that power?
A vital question.
Current U.S. law provides one answer. Some citizens believe that answer should change. Others believe the existing balance is appropriate. In a representative democracy, those questions are ultimately decided through public debate, legislation, and the ballot box.
It is a reminder that the law is not etched in stone. It is a living reflection of what society is willing to accept.
So tomorrow morning, when you walk out to your mailbox and you see an official envelope and you feel that little spike of anxiety, I want you to ask yourself, what does equality before the law actually mean to you? Who really holds the power? And who should pay the price when that power makes a mistake? Thank you for going on this deep dive with us.